plus some little extras on the side. Charge for the lights, extra for the mice, 2% for looking in the mirror twice. Here a little slice, and there a little cut, 3% for sleeping with the windows shut. When it comes to fixing prices, there are lots of tricks he knows. How it all increases, how they're mixing pieces. Jesus, it's amazing how it grows.
So anyway, if you go to the Atlantis Hotel in the Caribbean, you will know what this song is about. There's like nothing to eat on that island except their food. And it's like $50 a meal for like a crappy burger. And like to go use a towel to go in the pool is like, you know, $100 or something like this, right? So, sometimes you can see pricing like this for reasons that really aren't price discrimination. They're just differences in cost. So one example of that is that it's really cheap for a movie theater to have you go see their movie like on a Sunday afternoon. That's the reason why they offer matinee prices. It really has nothing to do with price discrimination, right? It's just that if nobody's going to the movie at that point, you know, there's just no cost for them having you there. Whereas if you come on a Saturday night and the movie's going to be sold out, then there's a huge cost for you to be there because you're taking the spot that someone else might have, right? This is called peak load pricing, and electricity is often priced this way too. It can be more expensive to buy electricity during the peak times. Yeah, Tejas.
What's the difference between doing that and then versus what you're talking about with the airlines, like having the prices?
I'm going to say it in just one moment. Yeah. Okay. Another example is it could be cheaper to sell goods in bundles. Like if you sold Microsoft Word and Excel separately, you'd have to pay for the different packages, and you'd have to pay for the distribution of these different things. So it might just be cheaper to put them together into one thing. So that's another reason you could have bundling. Another example is that some people may be cheaper to serve than other people are. So for example, in health insurance, people who are sick are much more expensive than people who are healthy. And you might charge people with a chronic health condition more, not because you're price discriminating against them, but just because they're more expensive to offer coverage to, right? Another reason why you might offer discounts for senior citizens, but definitely not for students, in movie theaters, is that senior citizens tend to just sit there and watch the movie, whereas young people can be very loud and rowdy, right? So the key question then is why, as exactly what Tejas said, which is why are these things not price discrimination and the other stuff was? And the key thing is all these are driven by the costs to the firm. The other things were driven by how much people were willing to pay. So when a price is targeted at how much people are willing to pay, it's discrimination. When it's targeted at your costs, it's not discrimination, it's just dynamic pricing. And in fact, charging the same price over time can be a form of discrimination if the costs are different. So think about parking lots. Parking lots do charge a little bit lower price during the day than other times, but not really very much. And that's clearly price discrimination. Because there's clearly sometimes the day when there's no one in the parking lot, and there's no cost to them for you to park there. So the price should be really low. But the demand isn't lower, and so they charge a high price. You see what I mean? And so actually, even a constant price can be discriminatory if the cost conditions are changing. And the reason the price isn't changing is the demand conditions aren't changing. Yeah, Eric.
So for the movie theater example,
yeah.
The reason you said the costs are different is because the movie theater will be empty on a Sunday, like less full on Sunday than on Saturday, right? So like the cost of having you there filling up a seat is much less. But how is that different from airlines, for example, charging you less when like near the end, like a day before the flight?
Yeah.
How is that different from that? You know, when they're like, oh, we've got an empty seat that would cost very little to fill.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's some truth to that. That's possibly one explanation for it. My guess is it doesn't explain all of it, but I think that might be right. And I think those special last minute deals sell out too quickly for that really to be the case. But that could be true. So another imperfect form of price discrimination is to group people not on the basis of how they behave, but on the basis of who they are. So you use some objective characteristic to charge them different prices. In particular, you try to charge lower prices to people who you think have more elastic demand, right? So this is a very common strategy in entertainment and transportation. And Amanda, can you think of some examples of just charging different prices, not to people based on what they buy, but just on who they are?
Medicine?
Yeah, sure. So, in particular, what are you thinking?
So for example, if a person is really sick and has like some sort of has a sort of extra care than
Yeah.
the medicine, and if they buy a lot, then it's gonna be cheaper. But if the person just needs it one time, then it's gonna be a little bit more.
But see, that's based more on their behavior. But can you think of something that's based purely on something that, like, I can just see about you?
What do you mean?
Like charging some type of person more than you charge some other type of person, not based on what they did, but just based on who they are.
Yeah, for example, in the movies.
Yeah, the senior citizens is a perfect example, or students get a lower price as well. That's right. Another example is libraries have to pay a lot more for journals than you would have to pay to subscribe yourself, because they're willing to pay a lot more to have it in the library. Another example, which I think is actually pretty funny. So I went to Equinox Gym on the north side, and I was thinking about joining there, and they were like going to give me a big discount because I'm an educator. I don't think they realized that like professors probably earn as much as like most people that come to their gym, but they sort of thought I was like, you know, some inner city teacher who was like earning nothing, right? But because I'm an educator, you know, even though it doesn't really indicate anything about my income, they were going to offer me a much lower price. Another example is, which is also along the lines of what Amanda was saying, is you charge lower prices in developing countries for drugs, right, or for books. Another example is if you can prove that you're a student, you get a much lower price for Microsoft Word and Microsoft Office. If you're at a big corporation, you have to pay like 4 or 5 times as much. Also, things like unemployment insurance or giving people a higher price, higher taxes if they're taller, which we'll talk about in a moment, are ideas of discriminating against people based on characteristics of themselves they can't change. Yeah?
Just wondering, what stops like libraries from signing up as individuals?
Well, that can be a problem, but usually you can identify it. Like, you know, they have to tell the truth or they'll go to jail or something like that.
Maybe it's law and stuff?
Yeah. Yeah.
Does this count for the home and office software licensing? Does it count if we're talking about upgrade? Like it takes $100 to upgrade from XP to Windows 7.
Yeah.
But if you buy a new Windows 7, it costs $300. Would that fall into this category?
I think that's a little bit more second degree because it's based more on your behavior and less on who you are, you know what I mean? But these things are always subtly different from one another, but I would say that's more in that category, yeah.
And for number 2, wouldn't it be the case that libraries are just, they'll just have to pay more because multiple people are going to be using the journal?
Well, so that's an argument you can make. You can make that in some sense it's sort of like cost, though it's not really like cost because it's not like it really costs anything to supply the journal, more to supply the journal to them. But yeah, you could say in some sense it's a little bit more like that because it's like you're undermining my ability to sell to other people or something like that. Another example is, you know, if you go especially to most developing countries, it's really, really cheap to go to like the national parks if you're from the country. And if you're not from the country, it's really, really expensive. So I bet Marie, you get a good price in Guatemala on all of the things, and if you bring along another American friend, they have to pay like 5 times as much, right? Another great example of this is actually, if you go to most restaurants in Chinatown, they have like a secret Chinese menu, and that both has the best food on it, and it's like costs like half as much, because basically like they think all the Americans are going to be scared from ordering from the Chinese menu, and so it's a way to like discriminate and charge lower prices to the more elastic Chinese consumers. And okay, so let's do a mathematical example of this. So imagine that demand in the high market were this linear function 1 minus 2p over 2. High market is the one where you're going to want to charge a higher price, and the demand in the low market is 1 minus p. Right? And let's assume that there's 0 marginal cost of production. So the discriminatory optimal price, remember, it's always halfway up the demand curve. And so in this case, that's going to be at the price of 1, because then demand is 1/2. And this one, it's going to be 1/2, because this price is 1. Because this would have no demand at a price of 1. Right? So in the low market, you'll charge a price of 1/2. In the high market, you'll charge a price of 1. Now, Ishan, what's the total demand if you can't discriminate? What's the demand curve you face if you have to charge the same price to everybody?
Can you repeat the question?
Sorry. What is the price that you would, if you have to charge the same price to everybody in these two markets, what's the demand curve of the market as a whole that you face?
Would it be QH plus 2QL?
Yeah, so what would that be?
2 minus 3P over 2.
Yeah, so that's right, except what happens when the price gets above 1?
Well, the price gets above 1. QL, like there will be no demand.
Yeah.
So it would be 2 minus 3P over 2, but
Well, so it's just going to go back to being 1 minus p over 2, right?
okay.
So it's a kink demand curve. So it looks like what you described until you get to that price, and then there's a kink and it becomes just minus p over 2, but that's right. Okay, so for p less than 1, it's 2 minus 3p over 2. For p greater than 1, it's 1 minus p over 2. So the optimal price that you can get if you choose in the part before the kink is going to be 2/3. Because that, again, is halfway up this demand curve, right? And then we have to compare the profits that we'd make if we charge 2/3 versus if we charge the optimal price in this market, which again we said was 1, right? Because in that case, there's going to be no demand in the low market. And Matt McCracken?
Yeah.
Can you give me an argument for which of these points is going to be optimal, or help me compare the profits, or something like that?
No, I don't know how to.
Or you can come up here and compute it if you want. So what's his profit going to be if he charges a price of 1 and he serves no one in the low market and he serves the high market? What's his profit going to be?
Well, then demand's going to be 1/2, so he's going to get profit of 1/2, assuming the marginal cost of production is 0.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And what about if he charges the price 2/3 and he serves both markets?
If he gets 2/3, he'll get 1/3 from the low market, and he'll get.
You can just use this old demand curve here.
Oh yeah. Okay. Then it would be 2/3. You get 1.
You get 1 times 2/3.
Times 2/3, so it's 2/3.
Which is more than 1/2,
Yeah.
right? So he's going to choose to charge this point, and that's very intuitive. Why is it so intuitive? Well, he could always, in some sense, this point where he charges 1 is on this demand curve here. And it's not the optimal point on that, so he wouldn't want to do that, right? Okay. So now, is discrimination good or bad in this case? Prashant, can you help us figure that out? Does it increase Wealth, does it increase production? Does it decrease production? Does it increase welfare?